Gentlemen, let's give a nice young leader's welcome to Mr. Jim Firnstahl.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. You know, it dawns on me that our conference theme is Impact the World, right? And we know let's impact the world with the gospel, right? But we heard this morning from Dr. Lindsay about impacting the world right where we work, didn't he? I mean, he didn't really connect that influence. He connected somehow good works and so forth. But I thought that what he was getting at was that we can, when he said at the end that we can be a blessing, we're blessed so we can bless others, is a way of saying that we can have influence where we are. And hopefully it's a godly influence. So, I wanted to talk a little bit to you why I think that you need to be a global thinker and actor, something which is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to start with this idea. Oh, and the other thing that we talked about this morning, our theme for today is equip, right? So how can we equip ourselves to impact the world? And I think one of the ways we do that is we think about, we start to think globally. Okay? And think how we can act globally as well. That's how we can have influence and impact the world. Let me give you a couple of thoughts along those lines. A couple of things to think about. I'm going to give you 3 forecasts that are very life-changing. In fact, they're global-changing. In the year 2050, world population is going to do something it has not done for the last 200 years. It's going to stop growing entirely in the year 2050. Population has been growing for how long? About 200 years. Only 200 years of growth has taken place in the population. Prior to that, it was very stable for about 8,000 years, as far back as we can go. Isn't that amazing? It really didn't grow for all that time. Something happened in the late 18th century, and that's called the Industrial Revolution. The steam engine was invented. And so for the last 200 years, we've been on this track of economic growth, population growth, which follows it. Now we have something completely different. The population of the world is currently 7 billion. It's going to stop at about 9 billion in 2050. Very few people argue this is the case. There is no population problem. It simply is the opposite. What are we going to do when population stops growing? Something else in 2050. You may be aware that computing power is growing very quickly. Technological power is growing very quickly. In fact, in the next 24 months alone, all the computing power that's ever been invented and employed in the world since the 1930s until now, in the next 24 months will double. That's how fast it's growing. And we now believe that by the year 2050 again, year 2050, we will reach something that technologists call technological singularity. You might want to remember that. Technological singularity. What is that? That is when artificial intelligence brought about by computers and software will equal or exceed human intelligence. Technological singularity. You may be aware, if you're a doubter, you may be aware that humans cannot beat computers at chess anymore. Computers can beat humans routinely now. And in word games, humans cannot beat computers either. By the year 2050, technological singularity. It doesn't mean computers will be in control. It means that they will equal or exceed our own capability of thinking. Let me give you one more. By the year 2050, economic activity will increase significantly. Today, since that 8,000 years of increasing civilization, the sum of the world's economic activity in 2014 will be $60 trillion. That's the global national product. Okay? GNP, global national product. In the year 2050, just a mere 30-some years ahead of us, It will go from 60 trillion a year. Remember, it took 8,000 years to get to that level. In 30 years, it will more than triple. By the year 2050, the world's GNP in 1 year, $200 trillion. 1 year. Now, you can think to yourself, what do these three things have in common when you're thinking about the world that we live in? Population stops growing. Computers do things we can't even imagine in 30 years. And enormous wealth. We will live, I think you can agree with me, we'll be living in a world where our lives, and especially our work lives, will be radically different. None of these forecasts I've given you are far out. They are truly within what will probably happen. So I wanted you to think about some things. The impact of that will be felt in almost every country. Why should you be a global thinker and actor? Connectedness. We are highly connected today. And in the future, because of these other things that are happening, we will be more connected in more ways than you can even imagine. Today, we are at the infancy of connectedness. We will be much more connected. And just imagine how much more global all of you are in this room than your parents were. Imagine that. Now imagine your children, and maybe you can't imagine that far ahead, but you might get married and have children, right? If you get to that level, imagine your children, how connected they will be. And all along that track, we'll be getting more and more global and connected. Global connectedness. Another thing that you need to consider for being why I think you should be a global thinker and actor is because you're called to be Christ's ambassadors in the marketplace. This is a term that we use, it's right out of Scripture, and it's a very simple understanding. Wherever God has placed you and called you, you're called to be His ambassador, whether it's in a medical office, whether it's owning your own company, whether it's working for a multinational company, whether it's starting your own company, whether you're working on an assembly line, you're called to be Christ's ambassador right there. And I think that what that means in practical terms, since Paul, you have to read all of Paul's letters to kind of get a feel for what he meant by an ambassador, but he uses the term very strategically. And the thing that ambassadors have more than anything else is what Michael Lindsay was speaking about this morning. They are people, ambassadors are people who gain influence in their host country. Host country is the country that sponsors them. In other words, if you're an ambassador from America to France, France is your host country. And in the host country, think of it, the ambassador has no power whatsoever. Not a citizen, not a government official, not elected, doesn't own a business, doesn't pay taxes, doesn't have influence, apparently doesn't have influence, but the one thing that they have is that when they bring their influence, I should say they don't have power, but they can have influence in that country. And how do they do it? Well, they do it by being influential with the right people and giving them information, being informed at just the right time. They do it by gaining trust with people, developing relationships of trust and candor wherever they are. Interesting. An ambassador is in a country, right? But not of it. They're in the country, but not of it. Isn't that what we're called to be in the world? In the world, but not of it. You see what Paul's getting at? That analogy is beautiful that he uses. We really are ambassadors. And whether we acknowledge it or not, that's what Christians are. We're ambassadors in the marketplace, in the world. And here's what I think we should do. We should be global thinkers and actors because global thinkers and actors can be people who can be influential and people of action. They can do things. So I want you to think about a term that I'm going to give you. Christ's ambassadors need to be PIAs, people of influence and action. That's what we need to be. And to do that, you need to be a global thinker and actor. Let me give you a third concept. Another reason I think you should be a global thinker and actor. Oh, I guess what I could do is also say to you that when you're thinking about this, I majored in college in international relations in the late 1970s. I know that seems like another era to some of you. But in the 1970s, that's what I did. I majored in international relations. It was a small major then. Here's what I think. I wouldn't major in international relations. If I were you, I'd live a life where you're constantly minoring in international relations. Always thinking of yourself as learning more and more about the world around you, everything that you can. That's how people of influence and action live their lives. You're always learning about things that are going on around you. And in this connected world, as I mentioned as the first point, you're going to have access to lots of different information. You're going to have access to people in different cultures, and you're going to see things a lot of different ways. And so you're going to be taking that in, and that's going to help you to be influential in people of action. Global thinkers, global actors. Another thing that I think we have to recognize, this one is probably why I'm finishing with this, it's very important. You need to be a global thinker and actor if you're going to be Christ's ambassador, because the kingdom of God is a global kingdom. His kingdom is global. You see that? He is knitting us all into one holy race. That's Peter's words. One holy race, one holy nation. And he is doing it more and more all the time. Now, it was someone yesterday who said that globalization could very well be this process of integration. That's what globalization is. Right now, when we say globalization, the word really means economic integration. But it's more than that. It's a sharing of ideas, and in the business world we call that what? Best practices. Learning what the leaders and the successful people are doing and adopting their best practices. Well, that's what globalization is in a way. We share a lot of ideas and we find out what's going on in India. And what are they doing well there that I could learn? Well, how could I learn from them? Manufacturing process. How could they learn from people in the United States? Their manufacturing processes. How can we learn how things are done in hospitals in a certain area? You see, that all that information is being exchanged very quickly and daily on an information basis, right? That will be done more and more. So it's God's kingdom. And that's probably the most powerful reason that he needs you to be a global thinker and actor. And if you're going to be his ambassador in the marketplace, and you're going to be a PIA, a person of influence, then I think you need to be a global thinker and a global actor.